Good morning, everyone. And the nurse in me tells me that I just have to remind everybody, please drink lots of water. I think we need to keep hydrated. So we're starting today. We've had a wonderful start with a lovely prayer and some great prizes. And now we're ready to move on to introduce, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Mark Greenberg, who holds the Bennett Endowed Chair in Prevention Research at Penn State's College of Health and Human Development. He was the founding director of the Prevention Research Center for the Promotion of Human Development and served as its director from 1998 until 2013. He is one of the authors of the PAS curriculum, a curriculum that some of us are very familiar with. A number of people in today may be aware of it as well. The curriculum that's used, the PAS curriculum is used in thousands of schools in more than 20 countries, and it's a fascinating program. So we'll have a little bit more of a presentation around that program and its use in Canada later on today. Mark is the senior investigator on numerous national and international research projects, and just to name a few: Fast Track, Prosper, the Family Life Project, Ready, and of course PAS for Success. He's the author of more than 200 journal articles and book chapters, and I understand New York Times just picked him up last week, did a little article on him. So in fact, he's highly recruited all the time for interviews, not just in the States, but around the world. He is, he's received numerous awards, and I won't go over them all because he's received quite a few, but maybe one of the ones that I find is very interesting, the Society for Child Development Distinguished Contributions to Public Policy for Children Award in 2009, which is one of, I think for public policy, it's one of the issues that we're all wrestling with, is how to make sure that our policy reflects the kinds of issues that are going on in our world today, and how to ensure that our policy is relevant and meaningful for our children and our youth. He's also been invited to present to the Dalai Lama. I mean, really, not many of us have had that invitation. That's kind of nice. And that was in Vancouver in, I think, 2006 when the Dalai Lama was in Canada. So pretty neat, pretty neat. His research include many areas, but generally they're all focused on how to help nurture awareness and compassion in our society. And it's really nice, and I think it's heart-moving. And as you hear Mark today, I think that you're going to understand he really is interested in how to nurture that compassion in our society. Not too many people, and certainly researchers, focus on that, and it's a tremendous need that we have in the research area and in society at large, how to nurture compassion. So more specifically, he focuses on things like promoting healthy social and emotional development through school-based prevention, ways to intervene in the developmental processes in risk and non-risk populations with a specific emphasis on aggression, violence, and externalizing disorders, the study of community partnerships and the diffusion of evidence-based programs, how to get the programs out. It's one thing to test them, but how to scale them up and get them out in our community. The study of contemplative practices and mindfulness interventions, and I'm sure that we all understand that the Dalai Lama and Mark would have a lot in common around that. So bringing mindfulness into our work, and Mark does a lot of mindfulness around teachers, but also around children, which I think is really important. And the interface of neuroscience, molecular genetics, and prevention. So he's got a wide range of research interests. I first met Mark I think it's about 8 years ago, it's quite a while ago, when one of the programs that he co-developed, the PAS program, was being introduced in Atlantic Canada in the South Shore Regional School Board of Nova Scotia. Since then, he's continued to provide invaluable consultation to the SEEK project, and the SEEK project is presenting this afternoon if you want to know more about what we're doing, and looking at how to roll out the PAS program, and we've been rolling it out in 5 sites across 3 provinces in Canada. And while he is from away, assume we all know what that means, I'm always amazed at his level of understanding of Canada. He really, truly understands how, despite our close proximity to the United States, our systems are different. And he does understand that, and he makes a point of every time I talk to him, he notes something that's going on in Canada that I think not everybody would know that, and he asks about it, and how's that rolling out in Canada? What effect does it have in Canada? He listens carefully and he asks questions to better understand. In fact, he actually uses what he preaches, social emotional learning. Since our first meeting, I have met with numerous other groups who have implemented PAS in multiple sites throughout the world. What becomes so very clear is Mark's interest in how to ensure that a program is working within each particular context, culture, and community. He doesn't assume that a program works exactly the same way everywhere. His ongoing attention is particularly interesting in how to build collaborative partnerships with key stakeholders in every site. He doesn't assume that a program will look the same in every site. He does assume that it all needs cultural adaptation. So he really pays attention and asks lots of questions. Sometimes he asks questions that you really have to stop and think, I haven't really thought about that. How did you think about that? So when I think about Mark, I think about he's everybody's person. He's warm, he's caring. He's truly a man for all seasons. It's really a pleasure and an honor to know him. So I'd like to introduce him, without further ado, Mark Greenberg.
So good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning, class. Okay, so thanks, Gene. Thanks very much. And thank the Atlantic Institute. So these meetings are fun to come to, especially when they're in a place like PEI. But we have to really honor the fact that this is a space for us to learn together in and to really think deeply about what some of that means. And I want to thank Judy Clark for her prayer, and I want to honor my grandmother, Ida, that was born in the 1890s in a small town in Pennsylvania on a farm. Ian's talk last night was really inspiring to me. That was a deep talk. I really reflected a lot and learned a lot from it. And one of the most important things he said is that transformation is hard work. And it really is hard work, and that's what we're really about here. So I'm going to drill down to schools today and talk about promoting well-being and preventing mental health problems in schools. But this transformation work is really hard. I'll just tell you a little story. It's about a girl who goes to her mother, and she says to her mother, I don't want to go to school today. And the mother says, why? She says, well, it's too hard. And the mother says, well, you have to go to school. That's the way it is. And the daughter says, but it's not any fun. And the mother says, well, school's not supposed to be fun. You're there to learn. You have to go to school. And then she says, but no one eats lunch with me. And the mother says, come on, honey, you're the principal. And that's the issue in a way, is that being a leader in a school is a really difficult job. And not only at the school level, but when you get to the board level, you get to the district level, you get to the department level, how to transform things, how to really make lasting change is a really difficult problem. If we knew how to solve it, we wouldn't be here talking about it. So we're all learning as we go. So I will disclose to you that I am an author of the PAS curriculum, and I have a royalty agreement. I receive royalties from the publisher, and my university reviews that on a regular basis. So let's start with the end in mind. I want you to turn to your partner next to you. You can introduce yourself if you don't know each other. And just ask yourself what knowledge, skills, and attitudes we want students to possess by the time they graduate from high school. Okay? Just take a minute and say hi and mention one or two of these. Okay, well, in the interest of time, let's just hear a couple of them. Belt out a couple for me. What's a couple knowledge, attitudes, or skills that we want people to possess when they graduate from high school? Flexible thinking, life skills, time management, lifelong learners, collaboration, competence, great. I'll add being a voting citizen in a democracy. I think it's a really important skill for us to have, right? Especially given elections coming up here soon. So I'm interested in what it takes to create a caring school. And I think as many of us are here are parents, when my kids were in school, the most important thing I was looking for was my child's school, my kids' schools, caring schools, and I would have to say for the most part they really weren't. So what makes a caring school? I think there's a number of things that I would point to. One is that both children and adults need to have good emotion regulation skills, right? And there's a lot behind the idea of good emotion regulation skills, and I'll come back to it. When kids have good emotion regulation skills, they don't end up in the principal's office, okay? It's not a matter of how well they learn, it's a matter of how well they can regulate themselves. And it's the same with adults. When adults can regulate their emotions well, the staff relations are much better. And teachers and adults need to create healthy norms for a safe environment for kids, places where children can feel connected and also take risks, and where adults, teachers, can also take risks. Schools need to adopt practices that create what I'd call shared communities of learning, where people actually think that they're working together, right? There really is a sense of a family or a team that's really working together on behalf of children. And I don't see that in many schools that I visit, very few. And this can include things like high quality social emotional learning skills I'm going to talk about this morning. It could also, when you think about high schools, service learning and community connections are really important to this process. Okay, so depending on the developmental level, what the scope and sequence of these might include is different. And lastly, it requires principal and administrative leadership. I've never been to a school that I would call a great school that doesn't have a leader that really leads in this positive way. Okay? So leadership is, and the behavior of the principal is incredibly important. And she should want to go to school in the morning, right? Okay. So I'm one of the founders of CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning. It's a nonprofit in Chicago, founded about 20 years ago, just a group of us that got together and said we have to define a field here of promoting well-being in schools. And we advanced the science of social emotional learning. CASEL has consumer report type reviews of all social emotional learning programs, at least in the United States and Canada, on its website at all grade levels. We expand effective practice by working with large school districts around the United States and in other countries. And we work to improve federal and state policies. So if you're really interested in social emotional learning, my talk is just an introduction, and I would suggest that you go to casel.org. So first I'll do a little poll with you, okay? And hands up if you don't mind. Are people with better social emotional skills more likely to succeed in school and in life? How many say yes? Okay, any no's? Okay. Can social emotional skills be taught? We all learned them, didn't we? Hopefully. And will children be better prepared for college, careers, and life if we teach them social, emotional, and academic skills? Okay. then how can we ensure that educators, human service providers, and families teach social emotional skills effectively? Right? You have to think about all those. You think about educators, human service providers, and I mean, in addition, by that I mean community groups, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, all kinds of groups, church groups, etc., as well as families being critically important. So if that's the case, what do we do about this? Well, Castle began this work a long time ago, starting with a book that went out to a couple 100,000 educators. It's sort of like what we call SEL 101, the Promoting Social Emotional Learning Guidelines for Educators. More recently, just about 2 months ago, the Handbook of Social Emotional Learning was published. And so those of you that are interested in the depth parts of this, these are two I would suggest you take a look at. So Castle defines social emotional learning as having 5 components. Okay? 5 components. How do we define this? What is it? And the first 2 are the ones in red. Those are intrapersonal skills, skills that you think about inside ourselves. One is having self-awareness, being aware of our emotions, being aware of our strengths and weaknesses. Second is self-management, our ability to regulate our behavior, especially when we're under stress. Those 2, I think, have important and powerful components of what Ian talked about as resilience last night. Okay? But there are also social or interpersonal aspects of social emotional learning. There's awareness of others, social awareness in the blue, and that includes the ability to have empathy, take other people's points of view, to be compassionate. And then there's relationship skills. This is the part we often fall down on in our own relationships. No one's, as I say, we're all craziest in our closest relationships. So if we could interview the spouses of the people in this room, we might find a different perspective on each of us, right? And relationships are difficult. It's difficult to negotiate, persuade, and most importantly, it's difficult to listen. Listening is a very difficult task for most of us. We already know what we want to have happen, and listening to the other person's point of view is often very difficult. But these skills are also cognitive skills, and they are wrapped around this green skill of cognitive decision-making or responsible decision-making. And that has an ethics component to it, because there's a need for an ethics model that drives all this, or we could use all these skills for ill rather than for good. So this is sort of the way we define social emotional learning. And we can think about a scope and sequence from really infancy or toddlerhood all the way through adulthood of the kind of skills that we would teach in what order in each of these domains. And in fact, Castle and a number of other places have done this. British Columbia has done this under its domain of what's called social responsibility. So the framework we have is that we want to enhance children's academic and developmental performance, and that means we need coordinated school and family and community programming, teaching these kinds of skills, and there's pretty good evidence now, 217 randomized trials, that it leads to academic success, healthier behavior, better social relationships, and more engagement. Okay? And I'll talk a little bit about some of that today. But we can think about those skills that are in the middle there as part of a much larger picture here, and that these skills are not just something we want to teach, but we want to create these caring and nurturing schools. And that means while we want to have instruction with evidence-based programs, that's not the goal. The instruction through evidence-based programs is a vehicle, but the vehicle is really for building school-wide practices and policies that nurture children's development and that nurture teachers' development, right? That make schools healthy places. And that really requires not just things we do in the school, but family and community partnerships. And we could put another circle around that talking about school board members, and another circle around that talking about departments and the integration of departments in provinces and states. Right? There's all kinds of levels at which we can think about this. We can think about it at the really large macro level of what's our philosophy of life. What is it that we think children should have? What should parents have? Right? And we can see that in the different patterns of leave, for example, in Northern Europe versus the United States. What we value, our ideology. So while we have these skills we want to teach kids, these are all patterned by these larger domains of influence. So SEL improves academic outcomes. It improves kids' attitudes, their motivation and commitment to school. And these are all the result of randomized trials. You can look in the Handbook of Social Emotional Competence. Improves their behaviors, and it improves their performance. There's a meta-analysis. Actually, it's not submitted for publication. It's published in 2004. Sorry, it's an old slide. And what it showed is in a meta-analysis of 217 studies of social emotional learning at different grade levels, that it improved children's social skills by 23 points. This is percentile points. Think about the average child's at a 50th percentile, so up to 73rd percentile, by having a good quality social emotional learning program. They improve their attitudes towards their self and others, their pro-social behavior, but most importantly, from a policy standpoint, their standardized math and reading achievement scores. So the average child in a school that has a quality evidence-based social emotional learning program on average will be 11 percentile points higher than a school that doesn't have it. Okay? So what does that say about our attitudes about learning and about the test scores? Test scores aren't a bad thing. I'm not totally against them, although I might, in the United States, have my children opt out of these tests because there's so many of them, and you're probably getting more and more of this. The tests are important, but they're a very poor marker of our society, aren't they? What are the skills that we talked about earlier? Lifelong learning, competence, managing stress, being a participating citizen in a democracy. Well, we need to read the ballot, but we need to know a lot more about life and how we want our lives to be lived than just what's in a test score. At the same time, by promoting social emotional learning, we improve these test scores. So how do we do that? What's a thought about how we might be doing that? Why would teaching children about themselves improve their academic, their math and reading scores? No difference in the math and reading instruction. They might believe in themselves. They might have more of a commitment or motivation, right? Provide an opportunity to think critically, right? So it's broader critical thinking skills. And in fact, is Sophie Jacques in the room? Hi, Sophie. So Sophie studies executive function as well as I do, and in 3 different trials we've shown that there's some improvements in executive function, these underlying master skills, working memory, and inhibitory control. I think a lot of it has to do with the kids' emotions, that when kids are taking tests, as well as much of the time they're in school, they have a lot of anxiety and inattention. And what social emotional skills can do is help children to manage their anxiety and inattention so they actually pay more attention when they're actually taking tests, which isn't a bad thing to happen. And it also, of course, improves their negative behaviors, their psychopathology, if you will. So what we're really interested in is not just a curriculum in a classroom. Curriculums are essential components. That's what the randomized trials show the effects are. But we really want to have systematic school-wide social emotional learning, or what I call caring school. And that means schools establishing a shared vision, getting a sense of what their resources and their needs are, having high-quality embedded professional learning. We always say that the first workshop should never be the last workshop. That is, people learn slowly over time, and by learning something, trying it out, there's the cycles of innovation. Teachers enjoy and improve more. Implementing evidence-based programs, integrating beyond the school, involving parents and community, and using data for continuous improvement. This is what a systematic school-wide model would look like. Does anybody know a school that's like that? There aren't many. Okay? So see where we need to go. See the problem is right now. We're not using data for continuous improvement. We're often not thinking about what the shared vision is, the big picture. We might be sort of using a curriculum of some kind, but what's the reason we're using the curriculum, and how are we knowing if it actually makes a difference for us? That's the bigger picture that we need to be interested in. So there's an economic value of SEL. There's a recent meta-analysis of the benefit cost showing by Clyde Belfield and Hank Levin at Columbia University, showing about an $11 savings to every $1 spent. And most of these economic analyses are done by an institute in Washington State, and they've just done an analysis of paths in the United States showing about a $15 savings to every $1 that's spent. So there's a lot of arguments here from a policy standpoint, right? Cost-benefit savings, improvements in academic development, and changes in behavior, right? So what's the problem here, right? Why don't we have more of this? Well, Winston Churchill once said that there's only 2 things you don't want to see made. One is sausage, and the other is policy, right? Policy making is really complicated, really complicated. And evidence is only a very small component in how policy is made, as we know. So I'm going to talk now about one of these curriculums because I know it so well. 36 years ago, when I was 9 years of age, I started PATHS. It's a model. It's not there are other good curriculums, so don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to pervade one. I'm just going to give you an example of what one is, how it works. So PATHS is a school-based model. It's taught by teachers. It's really important that teachers are teaching this, not counselors. When we started this 30 years ago, first of all, people said two things. One is that there's no time for teachers to do this in the classroom, and it'll take away from academic time and achievement. Well, of course, the data shows exactly the opposite now. Okay? Second thing is teachers aren't trained. This is the job of counselors, okay? Because they were treating it like it was some kind of therapy or something, okay? And we know that when counselors do this work, as a supplement, it's good, but it won't have near the effect of a teacher doing it every day, all day long with kids, right? And when a counselor comes in and does this in the classroom and a teacher does something else, there's no generalization or maintenance, no reinforcement of these skills by the children. We don't see much effect of it. So we think this is a job for teachers. There are versions at different ages, and it's used in lots of places and lots of languages. So what's important is that these programs are independently replicated. Right? That not just someone like myself who developed a program shows that it works, but there are independent replications. And there are a lot for PATHS because it's an old program, 30, 35, 36 years now. So there are randomized trials. 7 of them are independently done, and they're in different countries. So they're done in Germany and the Netherlands and Canada and Switzerland, Pakistan, Turkey, right? And there are more underway. So I'll just give you a little feel for it. So what's PATHS about? I think if I put it in one word, one set of words, it would be living the golden rule. Okay? The golden rule, I think, is the fundamental belief system that pretty much we probably all agree on. That is treating others the way you want to be treated, and it's pretty much shows up in almost every culture, every language that we know of in the human condition. Okay. It's not a religious concept. All the religions adopt it. It's really a naturalistic concept. We see it everywhere. Right? It's fundamental. Okay? But the question is, how do you follow the golden rule? It's easy to say the golden rule. As we all know, in our own lives, it's really hard to follow that. We often don't treat others the way we want to be treated, right? Because we're angry or resentful or we're jealous or all kinds of reasons, emotions and thoughts. So there's a lot of skills to be taught to really have us all come to that point. And it's a great saying by Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde once said, "Only the naive know themselves." And what he meant by that is that our own social emotional development is a lifelong process. Until our last day, we'll still be struggling with how to live our lives in the way we think they should be lived. So with both kids and adults, there are a number of skills that we can teach that really get us towards this. One is the awareness of emotional states. That is, just being aware of how you feel, how other people feel, is important. And the second part of that is putting feelings into words, which any kindergarten teacher will tell you. Use your words. There's a great wisdom in that. In fact, there's good neuroscience wisdom in that, because there's very good data showing that when people attach words to emotions, the regulation of their brain changes immediately in microseconds. Okay, so very good work done in Los Angeles by Matthew Lieberman. The ability to calm oneself down when we're upset usually will keep us out of trouble, right? A lot of trouble that we get into. Planning ahead and thinking about our effects on others is really important. And in a broader sense, developing greater empathy and compassion. So that's what the PATHS curriculum is trying to do. Okay? The components are skill building for students, but also for teachers, because most teachers have not gotten. How many of you had a course on social emotional learning in your pre-service, in your bachelor's degree? See the situation we're in from a policy standpoint? In fact, only in British Columbia, as far as I know, at UBC, the only place in Canada that teachers are even offered a course in social and emotional development as part of their teaching degree. Okay? So you see the dilemma we're in. We know what the effects are, but the policies are not in place to get us where we want to be. Okay? So generalization is really important. Lots of opportunities for children to use skills during the day. Technical support for teachers so they get better at this. It's awkward at the beginning. Integrating it into academic subjects. and involving parents. Those are the sort of what we think are the important components. So what's necessary to do this well? Last night, Ian talked about implementation quality and implementation science. We've done a lot of work on this. I'm not going to bore you with the data today, but there's lots of publications. We know at least, we know initial training workshop. We like to do one day, have teachers go out and try things and innovate, come back for a second day. Teachers having a coach. Ian talked about coaching last night, how it speeds up quality of innovation. We have the prevention coordinators that meet with teachers, the coaches. They receive technical assistance from the PAS training organization, and teachers use PAS about 2 days a week, sometimes 3 days a week, for 20 to 30 minutes. That's the dosage that we think is necessary to create change. Just like if you don't take your antibiotics every day for the 7 days, it's not going to have effect. We know that. It's been tested. Same way we know that if teachers do this every other week or once a week casually, it's not going to have much influence. Might as well not do it at all. Okay? I'd suggest doing something different. Okay? Take the kids to the park. Okay. So, so there's a lot of processes we have that are developmental in teaching PAS. So we have our famous turtle, and the turtle is, has a name for the preschool kids, Twiggle. And Twiggle is a model, if you will, of learning to calm down, being able to go inside your shell and calm down when you're upset in order to use your thinking skills. So we're always working with kids on what we call inhibitory control, or the ability to calm down, to recognize that they're not together. They're either emotionally upset, they're inattentive, something's going on, and they need to take a deep breath or two and calm down so they can focus. In fact, before all this mindfulness work began, I was invited to meet with His Holiness in Dharamsala in 2000. And I had the Dalai Lama do turtle. So I had him stand up, take long, deep breaths, put your hands like this. You can't be hurting anybody when your hands are like this. PAS began with deaf kids in 1980, only in sign language. And then we would sign turtle. So the idea is to have a motor behavior that keeps you out of trouble and helps to regulate you as you begin to verbally regulate your behavior. As kids get a little bit older, as kids are learning turtle, they're learning the 3 steps for calming down. Visual posters are really important. And those 3 steps for calming down, the red light, then becomes the red light of the control signals poster the next year. And the control signals poster is sort of a moniker that's in schools, on playgrounds, etc. In Mi'kmaq, it was adapted for the Mi'kmaq population here. There they made that control signals poster, rather than a red light, they made it a circle. Cultural adaptation. Okay. Feeling faces are very important. We give kids concrete ways they can recognize and talk about their feelings. Slowly, across a year, they get a set of faces that could be on their desk. Some of them have them on lanyards, some of them have them in their cubbies, with blue faces being for uncomfortable feelings and yellow faces for comfortable feelings. We don't talk about them as good or bad, right? Because all feelings are just natural. They're what we have. Okay? There's a lot more components to PAS. There's a lot on character and links to social studies, language arts, writing, journaling, etc. But I'll just tell you a little bit about studies. Some are quite large. We have studies that are over 6,000 children being studied at one time. And others are quite small. They've been done on typically developing children, children with learning disabilities, behavior disorders, deaf and hard of hearing. PAS has been used both in whole classrooms and in specialized contexts in Los Angeles and in London and in Belfast in Northern Ireland. It's also used as an addition both in the classroom and as a pull-out program for kids that have special extra needs. So I'll just answer a couple of questions. Can we actually promote greater social emotional competence? And you already answered that in my poll, but the answer is yes. We can see improvements, for example, in grade 3 and teachers' ratings of how much tolerance kids have for frustration, like how they can manage their behavior, and in improvements in what we call peer-rated sociality. So we would interview in the study 5,000 children about all of the other children in the classroom. We would get an average for each classroom of how pro-social children thought their friends were, how nice they were. And we would then compare schools that are randomized to get the PAS curriculum and those that are not. And we see significant differences with higher peer pro-sociality in those schools that used it. But we can see this in preschool children. We can see improvements in teachers' ratings of social emotional competence in 4-year-olds, and also improvement in parent ratings of even though everything is happening at the school. So here's an example of, this is in Head Start low-income kids in the United States, and you can see an improvement and the intervention kids and their social emotional competence across the year. Can we reduce problem behaviors? This is what funds paths usually, something in the mental health realm. And we can see improvements in teachers' ratings of externalizing aggressive behaviors, disruptive behaviors. We've seen that in lots of studies in different countries. We can see improvements in ratings of aggression and hyperactivity. We see that not in the United States, but we see it in Zurich, Switzerland. We see it in Ankara in Turkey. And children reporting lower rates of their own depressive symptoms, how sad they are. In fact, sadness or depressive symptoms are much easier to change than aggression because children don't get a reputation for being sad, but they get a reputation for being aggressive, and they have to earn a new reputation, as I might say. So here's a measure. It's the classic Achenbach measure, a terrible measure we don't use anymore because teachers hate it. It's too long. But you can see that this was pre-test, post-test, a year later, and 2 years later. So 2-year follow-up. This is second and third graders that become fourth and fifth graders. And this is a measure of teachers' ratings of behavior problems on the average in their classroom. And this is one of the important issues about prevention, is that there's no significant effect till 2 years out. Okay? But 2 years out, there's a really important effect. Okay? It's a serious and important reduction in behavior problems. Okay? So if we'd only looked at post-test at the end of the first year, we probably wouldn't have seen an effect. And why is that the case? Because when you want to prevent something, the control group, the rest of the population, has to begin to have the disorder. So, for example, if we divided Canada in half, where would that be? It'd probably be in Ontario? No, it'd probably be in Saskatchewan or somewhere, way over. I don't know, there's a lot over on this side. But if we did, and we divided it in half, and we gave half the population in the West the polio vaccine, and we didn't give it to anybody in the East, and we waited 3 months, and we looked at its effect, we'd find that the vaccine had no effect. Why? Because not enough people developed polio in 3 months. Okay? It's the same thing here. Kids mature in their behavior slowly over time, and we have to wait long enough to see the preventive effect. The preventive effect sometimes is quick, sometimes it's much slower. This is an example of children's own ratings. This is a study that has many kids. It's 6,715 kids in 56 elementary schools in 4 American cities and rural areas. And this is kids' ratings of how many kids in their classroom are mean. That's how we talk about it. How many kids in your classroom are mean? We show pictures. The kids pick the pictures. Okay? We average it up by the classroom and the school. We compare intervention and randomized comparison schools. This is data on children's depression, or reports of symptoms of sadness, really. And what you see is that there's an effect by post-test. That's not that big, and it grows steadily over time. Okay? Can we improve classroom climate? Right? Can we make classrooms nicer places? Remember I talked about creating caring schools. And there's lots of data on this. This is just, again, the same study, 378 classrooms. And we had observers who are blind to condition go in and observe in these 378 classrooms. This is a very expensive study by the US government. And what we see is that there's an improvement in the classroom atmosphere. So there are lots of new research findings that are not done by me, but by other people in Canada, Europe, and other places. This is a new study just published in Northern Ireland. It was in disadvantaged neighborhoods outside of Belfast, the towns of Craigavon and Lurgan, in which there's still a lot of post-war conflict going on. It was a randomized trial, 12 schools, all grade levels from preschool to grade 6. And you can see how many kids it had in. And the researchers were at Queen's University and York University in Ireland and England, did the study, and they measured teacher ratings on the strength and difficulties questionnaire, and children were interviewed for their problem solving. P1, P2 is like 5, 6, and 7-year-olds. And what they showed is that students had greater empathy, cooperation, and caring. That's the effect size, 0.37. Greater active helping of others, and lower negative affect in the schools that had paths. And in student testing, kids understood more. They had better emotional understanding and better problem-solving skills. There's no rating, no difference on aggression in this study with the younger children. But with the older children, that's now like 4th, 5th, 6th graders. They also showed greater empathy and compassion and cooperation, reflectivity and perseverance in their work, lower fighting and aggression, and again, better social understanding and problem-solving skills. So Very different context. Northern Ireland is a very unusual context to work in, I can tell you. And this is an example of volunteering to help others as an item. And what you can see is that the intervention group actually is a tiny bit lower at pre-test, and you can see a dramatic change in the teacher ratings of those skills over time. Listening to other people's points of view. There's another example. Qualitative reports. We do a lot of qualitative work in almost all of these studies. In this one, the researchers interviewed the principals, and what the principals emphasized is the decline in the frequency of disciplinary reports to senior managers in the school. That is, fewer kids are showing up in the office. And that's probably really the best observational measure you can have, is how many kids are lined up in the morning in the office because they're already in trouble. Pathways to Learning is a randomized trial in Baltimore, inner city Baltimore, very difficult neighborhoods. The neighborhoods of The Wire. Anybody watch The Wire? Those neighborhoods, led by Denny Fishbein, who's at the Research Triangle Institute. And they found just after 1 year in kindergarten significant effects on these kinds of outcomes, aggression, hyperactivity, et cetera. There's a very large study in the United States, and Head Start is an independent study. 20 U.S. Head Start locations were randomized, and there were significant outcomes for teachers. Teachers showed improved instruction in the PATHS Head Start programs compared to the randomized controls run by the government. They were better in emotional modeling, teachers' own emotion regulation, teachers' own social problem solving as they were teaching, and the support they gave to children. And outcomes for children in children's improved understanding and improved social behavior and attention, engagement, and learning. Okay. Study in Turkey just published by colleagues in Turkey at the University of Ege in Izmir. Izmir is a large city in western Turkey. All with young children, and again, showing the same kinds of improvements. A small study, they did first a pilot, showing changes in concentration and attention and aggression and disruptive behavior, teachers' emotional support for children, and a study two, a larger one, showing pretty similar kinds of findings. Jean and others are going to talk about the SEEK study later today in the afternoon, led at Halsey, and this was early findings showing some effects on both math and reading here in Canada. Hear more this afternoon. Okay. So that gives you a sense that PATHS is one example of a social emotional learning program. It's probably the most studied by far, and that if we do this work well, we can actually create change. The question is now, how do we do that? How do we think about this? How do we go to scale to create the kind of transformation to make caring schools? So that leads me to the issue of bullying and bullying prevention. Okay, because bullying prevention is sort of, it's the poster child in a way for social emotional learning, and yet it has a lot of dangers in the way it's done. And I want to talk about it because I think it's important to discuss. The bullying research has been really interesting, I think, and it's contributed a lot. It's identified and it's really brought to the public's attention an important form of aggression. Okay? Bullying is a really nasty thing. How many people in this room have been bullied in their lives? Okay, so I'd say about 90% or so. So we all know what it is. We've all felt it. Many of us have done it, in addition, right? Especially to our sibs, if not our peers, right? Anybody's not bullied a younger sibling in their life? Anybody that's not still doing it? Okay, it's been a lightning rod for policymakers. There is not one politician on the right or the left that will not stand up and say, I want to stop bullying in our schools. Everybody's for it. So from a policy standpoint, remember the sausage that's being made is very powerful because everybody wants to stop bullying because everybody has experienced it and it doesn't feel good. It's very easy to support. It also focuses on these really important dynamics in peer relationships, which I can't get into, but there's a whole field of peer relations around this issue. And it focuses on the need to improve schools' norms and schools' climates. That's all really important things. But bullying is a very partial and inadequate response to this kind of issue. Okay? First of all, it's taking the problem. It's a problem focus rather than thinking about what the agenda is for human development. It focuses on the problem rather than the developmental skills we want to teach children. Okay? Telling children to stop bullying has no impact, by the way, and most bullying programs in both Canada and the United States show no effect at all. Okay? There's been a lot of research. It marginalizes this whole field I've been talking about all day today so far, social emotional learning as something to be done when kids are being mean or bad or cruel, rather than about what kind of schools we want to have or what kind of citizens we want to have in the next generation. If we lower bullying rates, the problem's solved, okay? But that's not the problem. I said bullying is not a problem. Bullying is a manifestation of a much bigger set of issues. Dave Finkelhorst, sort of the leader in bullying in the world, says bullying is only one form of aggression. We need a much bigger frame, much bigger frame. Okay? And it focuses on context and to some extent relationships, but not on the kind of skills I've been talking about today. In fact, PAS has been shown, as other social emotional learning programs have been shown, to increase bullying at higher rates than bullying programs. Why? Because they're dealing with the fundamental skills that underlie this issue. Okay? And the results of the bullying programs themselves in most countries, other than Finland, Sweden, and Norway, where they began, are quite disappointing in most cases. Why? It's because it's not the bullying that's the problem. It's emotion regulation. Emotion regulation is the gold here. Okay? I published a paper a couple weeks ago with it got a lot of press in the New York Times and lots of other places around the world, in which we looked at teachers' ratings in kindergarten of children's social and emotional competence. 8 items. We asked 8 items, and we followed the children for 20 years. And we saw them again. We saw them regularly throughout that time, but we looked at their outcomes at age 25. Okay, so what are the kinds of things that would affect things like how often adults are arrested, or if they have a good job? Right? Social class, right? It's a really important one. Poverty. So we controlled for that. What about if their parents were teenagers? Well, it might have an effect. How about the quality of the neighborhood they grew up in? Probably important, right? So we controlled for that. How about their academic and IQ when they were young? That might affect those outcomes, so we controlled for that. We controlled for all the things we thought could affect what we call adult labor market outcomes. Getting a job, not living in public housing, having stable employment, not being arrested, going to college, graduating from high school. And what we found was once we control for all those other factors that we think might lead to these outcomes, the 8-item rating of teachers' social emotional competence in kindergarten predicted all these outcomes. It predicted graduating from high school, how many years children were medicated during school, how many years they were in special education, their arrest records as adults, criminal arrest records, not self-reports, if they held stable employment, and their mental health, depression and anxiety. Okay? 8-item measure in kindergarten predicting adult outcomes. Okay? So there's something very important about people's abilities to regulate their emotions, to get along with friends, to be able to calm down when they're upset, to negotiate. And this is what we can improve. So we want to change the narrative. We want to change the narrative from stopping or preventing bullying to creating caring, healthy schools. Just checking on my time here. Okay, wrap up soon. We want to change the narrative from convincing children that bullying is bad, which all of them know already. Knowing that bullying is a bad thing is not stopping any children from bullying. Right? Let's be realistic about this. Instead of providing rewarding pro-social relationships. Right? That's the way you stop bullying. We want to create norms for teachers, with teachers and students and the community that instead focuses on caring and altruism and kindness. That's how you stop bullying. So let's be proactive, let's be comprehensive, and let's be developmental. Comprehensive thinking not just about a curriculum, but school culture. Proactive by saying we need to think about what the agenda for human development is that schools should be focused on, and developmental by thinking about how do we do this in the best ways at each of the developmental levels. Doing social emotional learning in high school is a very different thing than doing it in grade school. So for example, any of you use the 4R program, David Wolf's program from Toronto? It's a fantastic example of a program on relationship violence, and dating violence, which is a really critical and important problem in teen years, right? It's not the kind of thing we would be dealing with in first grade. In first grade, we might be dealing with jealousy, right? Fifth grade, who are the masters of gossip in the world? Fifth grade girls. Wow, right? So we do focus groups with teachers every couple of years. What's the issue that they think at their grade level is the most important issue, and we add lessons around those issues. So what makes a school successful? We're going to try to transform what makes it successful. School-wide use, not a classroom here or a classroom there. Strong leadership. The principal, he or she is involved, comes to training, Ask questions. Ask for anecdotes in teacher meetings. Does things like has a problem solver of the week lunch, where they put out a tablecloth and candles in the cafeteria, and the best problem solver in each classroom gets to sit with the principal. The principal discusses it when they go to the Lions Club or the American Legion. They let people know about it in the community, right? There's consistency, consistent use, but there's flexibility at the same time. We have to really adjust this to each circumstance. And that means that we're integrating with the rest of the curriculum. We're integrating with what's being used in the language arts curriculum and what's being used in the social studies curriculum. It's integrating with the school's culture. It's changing the school's culture, if you will. And it's integrating with the community. The community is involved in it. So what does it look like? Well, it looks like this. It's everywhere. Right? It's in the principal's office. It's at the buses. The bus drivers are trained. In paths, there's a control signals poster on each bus. Right? And bus drivers are trained in how can I reinforce these skills in kids rather than yelling at them when they get up out of their seats. Okay? Even the bathrooms. So to have this work well, we have to think about the readiness of people, and most important is the readiness of the school leader. Right? The leadership is just critical, and we have some great principals here in the room today that have done work like this. But the principals need to evaluate their own social emotional development and their commitment to this kind of work. And they need to be a lead, what we call a lead learner. They need to be leading this process, not ignoring it, saying, oh, well, if the teachers want to do this, that's fine, but I'm busy. I'm busy with the important things, you see, rather than the school's culture. And the principal needs to elicit others' involvement and commitment. So when we do work with paths, when we go to scale, we not only do training with teachers, but we do regular meetings and trainings with principals, okay, about how it is, what do they do. We have a principal's manual. What's the principal's job in this process, right? We give them, for example, for elementary school, 180 school announcements. They have a school announcement every day about social emotional development. The practical things that go on in a school day. So what are lessons learned in over 30 years? Implementation of a program like this is difficult. And it's difficult because it creates change. It's what Ian talked about, transformation, change. Building school and staff readiness through coaching is critical. Just doing a workshop here or there is not really a way to create this kind of change that you want to sustain or to stick. The greatest effects occur over time with school-wide use and strong leadership, not just the classroom. So the effects we'd see in a school the first year are not nearly the effects we'd see in a school 3 or 4 years later. Okay? These build over time. Consistency, but flexibility and integration. Flexibility. Everybody talks about having fidelity. Having fidelity is important, but just as important, or maybe more important, is adaptation. We want to see adaptation, but we want the adaptations to be fitting into the logic model of what we're doing, right? So, for example, I got a call from a teacher in Eastern Washington State, and she said to me, I'm in trouble with my principal. And I said, well, what happened? She says, well, I'm doing the PASS curriculum, and I decided I would cry with my children. Cry with your children? I said, well, why would you be crying with your children? She said, I want them to get an emotional release. I said, this is not what we do. We never do anything like that. That's not appropriate. Right? No wonder your principal's upset with you. It's not the logic model. That's not the kind of adaptation that we would want to see. This is teaching children skills. This is not doing therapy. Right? So coaching and supervision is really important. Now, this is part of a much bigger picture. So let's go back to the bigger picture, which is really making caring schools. Because while we serve children in schools, the most important people in a school in many ways to me are the teachers. Okay? And really there are 3 components here, I think, of what makes an effective school. Social emotional skill development is what I've talked about this morning. Having effective evidence-based programs that are implemented with flexibility and consistency. But we also have to have effective conditions for learning. We need teachers that know how to do instruction, and we need order and not chaos in a building, right? Classroom management, school-wide management, right? PBS is an example of that. Not a bad example, but by itself alone is probably not sufficient. But the last thing we need to be thinking about, and it's unfortunately the last thing I thought about, was teachers' own well-being and their own awareness. And this is really a critical issue. It's the next generation of this work. Okay? We're now in the generation of trying to go to scale with social emotional learning. But just around the corner and not far away is teachers' own well-being and awareness. Okay? Because when teachers have more well-being and awareness, first of all, we see much greater rates of attention. We have an enormous human capital problem of teachers leaving the profession. But also, it improves their instruction. What we want to see is integrated models in the future like this, that integrate teacher well-being, children's well-being, and good school management into a whole that creates a caring and connected school. And for the last 10 years, partly inspired by my meetings with His Holiness, so I'm on a sofa in Dharamsala with neuroscientist Richie Davidson and Paul Ekman, sort of the father of emotion research in the world. And His Holiness turns to us and looks at us, and after the third day of our meeting with him, and he says, if we know so much from the West about emotions and relationships, and we know so much from the East about the nature of the mind and calming down and learning more about the mind, why aren't there curriculum for normal adults to make them healthier and more compassionate? It's a really interesting question. So we went back that night and we realized that wasn't a question, it was sort of a mission statement. And we began to work, which that was about 15 years ago, developing models for developing stress management programs based on mindfulness for teachers, for police, for nurses, etc. And we've now done a series of randomized trials in Pennsylvania and in the Bronx in New York City, very tough neighborhoods in New York with very high teacher quit rates, in which we've shown that when we randomize teachers, all teachers that want to be in the program, they're randomized, half of them get it, half of them have to wait a year. We see significant improvements in their instruction, their direct instruction to children as observed, but also in their well-being, lower rates of depression, and more enjoyment of teaching. And that's what we want. We want teachers to enjoy teaching. We want them to love the profession they chose and to be connected in a way that they're in an environment that's supportive, caring, and empathic. And when we have that, we have a school that runs well and we have children that learn more effectively. So that's our goal, and thank you very much. Did I run out of question time? Okay. Sure. Oh, yes. People would like to sit together, people that are interested in the work we're doing with PAS. If they'd want to join me for lunch, we'll find a place out in, I think, outside on the grass, outside the cafeteria. Just look for me, okay? Good. Yeah, Derek. Right. Right. Well, we have two programs. One's called CARE. It's a set of teacher workshops. Think about it as retreats that are a day and a half long, and you do like a Friday night, Saturday, about a month later, Friday night, Saturday, and then one more day of booster. And during those days, we introduce teachers to three kinds of things. One is thinking about their own emotional awareness. So we ask them to really understand what, especially in the classroom, what triggers their feelings of, for example, anger or anxiety, right? And try to understand for themselves how that arises and what effect it has. Second thing we do is we teach them different mindfulness techniques, from very simple ones like a 1-minute breathing exercise of stopping and calming down and focusing on the breath. We do sitting meditations with them, but relatively short. We do walking meditations. And we do what we call caring practices, which in the mindfulness tradition is often called loving kindness meditations. Okay? But we also teach them how to access their memory after they've had a rough time. So, for example, we have them practice, for example, how to use the memory of joy on a bad day to recover after they've left school. So they don't carry home to their family a lot of the burden. How many of you carry home to your kids stuff that went on at work, right? Teachers especially have that difficulty. So we're teaching them a whole variety of techniques. Some of them are around emotional awareness, some of them are around the use of positive emotions, and a fair amount around mindfulness. And in fact, we give them MP3 so they can practice at home. But the idea is not to become a meditator. We're not interested in teaching people to meditate. We're teaching people to become aware of themselves and to be intentional. So one of the most important things in mindfulness is setting an intention. Being intentional about whatever you're doing as being aware and awake and in the moment. Okay? So for example, we would suggest to teachers that one of the things that they might do every day, and you can all do this, you don't have to go to a workshop to do this, is in the morning when you're brushing your teeth or you're taking a shower or what I call windshield work, when you drive to the school and you turn your key off, you can do it there or do it in the shower, just take a moment and think, how do I want my day to be? What is it that I want today? Why am I doing this? And what do I want as the outcomes? Am I really ready for kids today? The second kind of project we've been doing is called mindful yoga. It's called the Calm Study, in which we have been offering in buildings, so it's place-based, 18 minutes of mindful yoga 4 mornings a week. So we've randomized schools, middle schools, that all want this. Some of the schools get it and some don't. And we follow the teachers over time, their health and well-being. We found reductions in their blood pressure, changes in their awakening morning cortisol response, and changes in their reports of both physical symptoms and teaching enjoyment. So there's really simple things that we can do to empower teachers to enjoy their day. And when they enjoy their day and they're ready, learning happens. Right? Thanks. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Nothing specific like that, but you know, it can only help. But we can't expect really good outcomes for kids if they're still living in those conditions. You know that. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's say with young, first of all, you saw the feeling phases. So they're learning about emotions. So we might have a lesson with sort of say on proud and ashamed, for example. We usually pair 2 opposite emotions. We talk about what we'd first ask kids, does anybody know what proud means, right? And we'd show them pictures of kids feeling proud. We'll tell them stories about people that were proud or ashamed. We'll have them do journal writing about this, so that kind of thing. Let's say we're interested in an issue that's a character issue. Let's say it's persevering in the face of obstacles. Right? We might tell the story of Aung San Suu Kyi, for example, in Myanmar, who was under house arrest for almost 20 years because she wanted to promote democracy. We'd tell her biography, and we'd have kids do research on other people that have also done things to restore democracy, and we'd have the kids write about it. Okay? And then we'd talk about how in their life did they do something that's really hard that they keep trying at in order to get better at it. We might have them set a short-term goal. So all different kinds of things depending upon the age of the children and the skills that are in a scope and sequence. Right. That's right. Exactly. And that's why we want to integrate with the rest of the curriculum. That's why the first year of school tries paths. It's still awkward. It takes a couple years for them to think, well, now how does this integrate with what we're doing? How does it integrate with our language arts? So, for example, we teach about little turtles with little kids. Some teachers then change their science, their STEM, and they do biology, but they started by doing it by focusing on turtles. And they start with turtles, and then they go out into the ecology and food sources and restoration of environments, etc. So they build their whole science model around the fact that the turtle is the center of paths, for example. So there's lots of different ways. Everybody does it different ways. We have thousands of examples, and we hold a conference every year somewhere in the world. Next year in Chicago, this year in Lisbon, Jean was there with me, where teachers and researchers, practitioners come and talk about all the adaptations they make and why they make them, and everybody learns from each other. So think about it as a living curriculum model. And that's how all these should be. They shouldn't be, do it this way, right? That's not going to work for any of us. Okay. Outside and catch a little fresh air. So thank you very much.
Okay, I'd just like to call on Pam McGee, the Executive Director of CMHA Nova Scotia, that manages the SEEK project and working with paths, to say thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark, for your very inspiring and timely, insightful presentation on behalf of all of us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
We have a couple of things that are big concern to people. I'm thinking if you're in the other theater, this may apply to you too. Someone's car keys. If you check your purse or your hip pocket or whatever and you're missing a set of keys, I have them. So just to let you know. The other thing is that the break is in the cafeteria, and there's signage now. Instead of walking, through the black curtain, they're doing jackhammering, I guess, there this morning. Go up the stairs and just along the hallway. It's a direct route, and there's lots of refreshments there, so you can do that or go outside and make your way there. But we're back here at 10:30 for the panel, and it's really bringing it back to Atlantic Canada to look at the landscape in Atlantic Canada.